Right. Good morning, everyone. How are you all? You awake? One person's awake. Excellent. That's it. So how did you travel here today? Did you walk? Did you take a car? Did you take a taxi? That's it. What were some options? Trains. That's it. Anything else? Car? Okay, all the kind of usual stuff. That's it. So we're going to go far, far beyond the car in this. So my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute. I'm a futurist and strategic advisor working with all of the brands and all the household names that you are using right now. So companies like Samsung, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, a whole variety of different governments and everything else. And I help these brands see up to 50 years in the future. So if you're a traditional organization, you look maybe up to 20 years out. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years out to create your strategy and the vision for your company. But if you're a sovereign government, you might look up to 50 years out. So this is where we look anywhere between 20 to 50 years out for the future of transportation, energy, infrastructure, jobs, skills, welfare state, tax. We have a solution for tax, by the way, in this presentation. You might like that slide. So when we talk about the future of mobility, I could quite easily stand up here and say, the future of mobility is fully autonomous vehicles that are fueled with alternative fuels, whether it's electricity, hydrogen, all sorts of that sort of stuff. And that's it. I could literally end the presentation there. However, when we have a look at the future of mobility, it's a lot more complex than that. There's a lot more opportunity than that. And in addition to that, there are a lot of things that you wouldn't expect that we can already do. So, in order to try to condense the future, so I look at hundreds of trends, I look at over 650 different technologies to try to understand what happens when you combine these trends and technologies together. What does that mean for example, in this case, the future of mobility? So you can download these codexes with the QR code. There is far too much to condense into a 45-minute presentation. However, with all the business leaders that I work with, they generally all have to try to understand what these trends are, what these technologies are, and the impact that all these different things like climate change, sustainability, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth will have on their businesses or their countries. So while I can't actually show you the books, I created a video. So when we talk about trying to understand what the future looks like, we've got all these landmarks, but we don't really know what the map looks like. We know that artificial intelligence will be increasingly impactful as we move into the next 20 years. We know climate change will be increasingly impactful. So we know all these things, but we don't necessarily know how to put them together to predict the future, which is where I come in. So when we start talking about trying to understand what the possible future looks like, this is what we're up against. Now, this is a DeLorean. So this is technically the futurist's car. This is one's coming back. So we already have flying cars. Yeah, if you go to Dubai, we have flying cars. But this one is just a concept. But when we actually look at things like the future, this is what you are trying to get your head around. What do all these signals mean? those are the technologies and the trends that will change every single part of your life, whether it's your professional life or your actual life. Over the next 50 years, all of these things basically are going to exacerbate. To give you an idea, the artificial intelligence slide was up there for 1/4 of a millisecond. Climate change was up there for 1/4 of a millisecond. That's what you're trying to figure out when we talk about the future. Now, when we start relating some of this back to the future of mobility, for example, we have things here, for example, like 3D printing. So 3D printing is an advanced manufacturing technology that fundamentally transforms how we make produce. So whether it's cars, whether it's human organs, and all kinds of different things. So when you start combining all these different technologies together, that's your next generation product or service, whether it's your next generation car, your next generation energy device, system, whatever it happens to be. When we have a look at things like biotech, for example, genetic engineering actually has a direct impact, basically, on the future of mobility, because we are using genetic engineering to create next generation sustainable aviation fuels and biofuels. So all these things, even though you might not think they relate to, say, mobility, they do, most of them. When we talk about things like compute over here, we've got quantum computers coming through. Quantum computers are billions of times faster than traditional computers, even the world's biggest supercomputers. Now, this particular one is already being used by BMW to optimize their supply chains. It's already being used by Volkswagen to help them optimize their self-driving car fleets. But when we have a look at computing, we also have biological computers coming through already. We have the 6th generation biological computer where we have turned bacteria into computing devices. So the future is strange, but the current day is stranger. When we talk about things like connectivity, we have 5G coming through, 6G coming through in 2028, and then we have low Earth orbit satellite systems. Low Earth orbit satellite systems connect every single thing on the planet to every single person on the planet. Electronics, when we have a look at energy, for example, there is almost more innovation in the energy sector today than in the whole of the biotech sector. And we'll talk a bit about that. When we have a look at things like artificial intelligence, yes, we have artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning systems that we are starting to embed into, say, vehicles. But we've also managed to 3D print an artificial intelligence, which when you put it on the front of the train, creates a passive artificial intelligence and a passive machine vision system. So when we think about the future of artificial intelligence, you can print AI. You can also encode AI in DNA, but that's a different conversation. When we talk about materials, we'll talk about this a little bit. When we look at things like infrastructure, self-healing infrastructure, biomineralization lets you repair all the cracks in all your roads. Robotics, security, when we look at security, we have quantum cryptography, and we have a variety of different ways to secure fully autonomous vehicles coming through. And then user experience, that's AR, VR, MR, neural interfaces. We even see vehicles coming through that have neural interfaces now from companies like Mercedes. So you kind of take this sort of starburst of technologies, you combine them together, and you get some really strange things straight out of the gate. Now, when we look at mobility, when we look at transport, a lot of people talk about the future of transportation. It never is. It's always about the future of mobility, moving something from one place to another. That's transport's fundamental raison d'etre. But then when we start having a look at mobility, the transportation companies and the manufacturers today basically are all affected by these trends. They've all got to decarbonize. That's net zero or net negative. We see new government policies coming in. So, for example, in the UK, as well as across Europe and India, governments have now passed legislation to ban the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles from 2035. So in 2035, if you wanted to buy a car with a diesel engine, you won't be able to. which means that all the manufacturers like Toyota, Volkswagen, Audi, etc., are automatically starting to sign away or starting to sign the death warrant on internal combustion engines. When we look at things like infrastructure resilience, so I'm working with the US government on their $1 trillion infrastructure bill around the future of transportation. Now, you might expect that if you're working with the US government to talk about the future of transport, you talk about flying cars, cars that drive themselves, whatever it happens to be. Increasingly, we are talking about what happens when the state of Louisiana and the state of Florida, by 2040, are increasingly underwater. There's no point having a road in Shanghai, for example, if a third of Shanghai is going to be underwater. So when we talk about infrastructure resilience, that's significant. In Australia, they have a new saying. When the birds stop tweeting, the roads start melting. Technology transformation. There is a huge amount of technology transformation in the industry. Speed of change. People cannot keep up with the pace of change. Everything that you think of as science fiction, I have videos for that. Whether it's teleportation, whether it is tractor beams, whether it's holograms, whether it's brain streaming, and so on and so forth. And then urbanization. Now, when we have a look at urbanization, the United Nations estimates that by 2030 to 2040, 65% of the world's population will live in cities. Most of those people will live in megacities. We have 54 megacities. We have over 1 billion people in those megacities. However, if we're looking at the future of mobility and transportation, those same megacities by 2050, quite a lot of them will be underwater, and over 1 billion people will be displaced. So if you're building rail networks, road networks, airports, basically in some of these megacities, they're all going to be useless if those cities are underwater. So different trends, different technologies have either indirect or direct consequences for the future of transportation and mobility. Now, today, when we think about mobility, we typically think that the things that we get into that have wheels move goods and people about, right? Vans, taxis, all that sort of stuff. However, as transportation goes increasingly autonomous, we'll move goods and people, but also services. Now, what that means is that in your future, don't think of cars as cars. Think of them as glorified smartphones that you happen to sit in. So when we talk about mobile services, you could be sitting in a fully autonomous car watching entertainment, having a doctor's appointment, doing your banking, all that sort of stuff. So mobile services on wheels. And there are lots of fun things, and I'll show you those. Now, when we have a look at mobility basics, as I said earlier, I could have wrapped this presentation up in about 10 seconds. Everything's going autonomous, whether it is cars like these, whether it's cargo ships, whether it's Airbus aircraft. We already have the first fully autonomous Airbus aircraft. Whether it is vans, whether it is trains, whether it is drones, everything is going autonomous. Now, from a car perspective, we're at category 3. When we get to category 5, that's when you can go and have a massage in your car and without worrying that you're going to be run into the central reservation. Now, it's estimated that when cars are fully autonomous, firstly, you get 30% less cars. They're available as a service, just like your Uber, but these are not cars. If you think a fully autonomous car or vehicle is a van that drives itself, a car that drives itself, you're thinking in the wrong way. They are technology platforms. Whatever you can do on your smartphone, these are giant smartphones on wheels. That fundamentally rewrites how you think about the entire industry. So when you take the pedals, the dashboard, and the steering wheel out of a vehicle, you don't have a car. You have a pod. a blank space. So we already have the death of the car. Audi and Toyota and all these other companies know that in the future, they will not be a car company. They will be a blank space company. Now, when we start talking about the energy revolution, we're moving from internal combustion engines to battery electric vehicles. Battery electric vehicles with lithium-ion batteries, that kind of stuff, generally I think they win. We've got fuel cell electric vehicles, but realistically you need to transport hydrogen. It's still very difficult to get hydrogen through the traditional gas networks because it corrodes the gas pipes. But we do have solutions for that. But in addition to that, we have companies like Toyota, Hyundai, Lightyear One, that have already commercialized solar vehicles. So solar vehicles is where the surface of the vehicle is coated in flexible solar panels. Now, I'll chat to you about solar in a minute. Now, this is the Lamborghini Terzo Millennio, estimated to be produced in about 2030. This has no lithium-ion batteries. It's a hypercar, but the shell of the car is a carbon fiber shell with carbon nanotubes in it. The shell of the car is the battery. It's called a structured battery. So when you think that the future of electric vehicles is lithium-ion batteries or fuel cells, reset your thinking. Those are transitionary technologies. Now, when we have a look at energy, there's a huge amount going on. So, these are presentations in themselves. But, for example, when we have a look at biofuels, we've got biogas, biohydrogen, and sustainable aviation fuels. So we're already seeing aircraft, for example, moving to SAF fuels, but also to electric and hydrogen. So aircraft will traditionally be more hydrogen-based than batteries. When we have a look at things like hydrocarbons, we still have the need basically for diesel. But increasingly, we can use artificial photosynthesis, especially within Europe, for a variety of reasons, to take carbon dioxide, oxygen, out of the air, combine it with water and electricity. So now we can produce diesel for your traditional diesel-powered cars, but we can extract that diesel directly from the air. It's carbon neutral. It also means that we don't have to import traditional diesel, basically from other countries, who shall remain nameless. So we have new ways to actually make fossil fuels without having to dig them up out of the ground. So that's called solar fuels. When we have a look at renewables, which you're sort of going to be more familiar with, we've got hydroelectricity, geothermal, solar and wind. Now, last year, 250 gigawatts of new electricity came online, and that was renewables. 90% of that was solar and wind. But this is where we start talking about intersecting trends. So, for example, I give you a statement: the future of cars is electric. So electric vehicles with lithium-ion batteries. If your electricity supply is not reliable, it doesn't matter if you have an electric car because you can't charge it. Now, one of the big problems that we're seeing in California, but also over in Shanghai and Shenzhen, is global drought. So in California, 85% of California is now under drought. Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam are 1 meter above the point at which these hydroelectric dams will stop generating electricity. In Shenzhen and Shanghai, a lot of the hydroelectric dams are now so low that in China they're having to ration electricity, and they are already having to limit the use of electric vehicles. So if we switched our economies from fossil fuel-powered cars to electric-powered cars overnight, you would need 3 times the amount of electricity. And without a robust electricity grid, your electric vehicles don't go anywhere. And there is a solution, but I'll talk about that in a minute. We also have things like 3D printed batteries. If you 3D print a lithium-ion battery, it has 400% more energy density than the batteries in your Tesla, for example. metal air batteries, mini nuclear, structural batteries that we see coming through with Lamborghini, but also wireless energy. So this is where we get interesting. So when we start having a look at alternatives to lithium-ion powered cars or lithium-ion battery-powered cars, firstly, we've got solar roads. So in France, they have solar roads that are generating electricity, and then those roads pass that electricity via conducting coils directly to the cars. We've got solar vehicles. So when we have a look at solar vehicles, for example, as I say, we have Lightyear One, Hyundai and Toyota that are putting solar panels over the top of their vehicles. Tesla will do the same, which now means you have a car with unlimited range. Now, when we talk about solar, a traditional silicon solar panel today is about 20% energy efficient. If you put graphene over the top of the solar panel, you generate electricity when it's raining. If you put bacteria into a solar panel, you generate electricity when it's cloudy with 50% efficiency. If you put carbon nanotubes into a silicon solar panel, you have a silicon solar panel that is 80% energy efficient. And if you 3D print your silicon solar panels, you can create a type of material called a nanotech material called black silicon. Those solar panels are flexible, they are spray-on, and they are 132% energy efficient. In the labs, we already have solar panels and solar concentrators in the US Department of Energy made that are 48% energy efficient. So solar vehicles are the ultimate transition. Why do you need a lithium-ion battery in your car if your car can generate electricity at night, when it's windy, when it's raining, when it's cloudy, etc., etc., etc.? And then we have wireless vehicle-to-vehicle charging, because your car that's in front of another car that's running out of electricity, you can use wireless charging. But if my car is charging your car on the highway, just like you wirelessly charge your smartphones, I can charge you for the electricity. And then we have vehicle-to-grid and virtual power plants. Now, this means that we end up with some rather weird things happening. Toyota creates a solar-powered car, right? This generates its own electricity. There are hundreds of millions of Toyotas around the world. And as Toyota farm through this fleet, this is an energy generator. Toyota becomes an energy utility because this car generates its own electricity and then wirelessly transmits that electricity, any extra electricity, to the car behind. Toyota in the future could actually make more money from selling electricity to smart cities or to other vehicles than they could from their own vehicles. When we look at Tesla, the lithium-ion batteries in a Tesla, when you plug it in at home, can support your home's electrical needs. So in California, Tesla lets Tesla owners opt into a program called the Virtual Power Plant program. So when the Californian grid needs electricity, you just click, and your batteries, the batteries in your Tesla that have electricity, can now provide boost to the Californian grid. And you get money for that. So the days of where your car is really expensive to run are starting to come to an end. The days of which your car is a depreciating asset that doesn't earn you any money is coming to an end. We also 3D print cars. This is from Big Rep. They 3D printed a fully autonomous electric vehicle. It's kind of a one-seater, but this scales up. It was also designed by artificial intelligence. Cars in the future will increasingly be modular. These are from Mercedes. But in the morning, it's a commuting office, whatever. After lunchtime, it's a van. And then in the evening, maybe it's a school bus. So, for example, when we talk about infrastructure around here, do you have anywhere where Mercedes could swap their modules in and out? They're recyclable. This is the BMW iVision. When we talk about the circular economy, This is available, estimated to kind of 2028. This is glued together. It's not riveted. So the whole car is designed to be taken apart and reused. Even the badges are lasered on. And then when we look at Mercedes concepts, these are the avatars. We've got neural interfaces, in-car virtual reality. We already have that with Halo and Audi. We've got adaptive materials, dynamic displays, phase-shifting materials, and everything else. And when we look at things like phase-shifting and shape-shifting materials today, we already have them. And then when we look at street life, bearing in mind that about 70 to 80% of the cost of getting you your parcels, that you've ordered from Amazon or wherever you've ordered them from, is the last mile. We've got robot dogs from Continental. We've got drones from UPS and Amazon. We have robots from Ford. We have scooters that drive themselves from companies basically like Turtle and Scooter X. So self-driving scooters are fun. Now, when you want to fund these things, when we look at smart cities around the world, increasingly smart cities are not run by elected officials. They're run by CEOs. So smart cities like Neom in Saudi Arabia, for example, Atlanta, Madrid. So increasingly smart cities are run by CEOs. Now, I also said I could get rid of your taxes, right? If I was a politician and I stood here and I said, what I'm going to do for you all is I'm going to eliminate all your taxes, I guarantee I'd have my opponent coming up and going, Matt, you're an idiot. Because if you eliminate taxes on the people, there's no way you can possibly fund infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and everything else, right? This is where technology lets us do new things in seemingly crazy ways. This is a real example as well, by the way, you can look it up. So in Miami and New York now, Miami have developed something called the Miami coin. It's a cryptocurrency. They teamed up with a company called Citicoin. Now, what happens is Citicoin will push an app to the people of Miami's smartphones. The citizens of Miami will mine cryptocurrency, the Maya coin. They get 70% of the profit. The city gets 30% of the yield, the profit. Now, this year alone, Miami has made over $100 million because its citizens have mined cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrencies go up and down and everything else, but hey-ho. The mayor has gone on record and said that when the city reaches $400 million, which is what they spend every year in taxes and investments, they will eliminate all taxes on their citizens. We already have the means and the technologies to eliminate all of the taxes on you guys. Do the politicians know about it? Probably not. Would they want to do it? They probably would want to do it. But this is a freaky area. How do you do this? What are the risks involved? All that kind of stuff. Now, when we look at fully autonomous vehicles, you now have a fully autonomous vehicle. So you're in the future, you bought one. They're supercomputers on wheels. They are packed full of GPUs. So in America, we already have autonomous, sort of category 3 manufacturers. We have a category 3 semi-autonomous car manufacturer called DayMac. Now, if you buy a DayMac car, when it's at home, it mines cryptocurrency. So while your car is plugged into your house, it's mining cryptocurrency that it then puts into your bank account. Cars are no longer depreciating assets. You start applying this to a public network of buses or whatever, decentralized computing essentially, all of a sudden what you have is you have supercomputers in wheels that are going around your entire country making you money. That's a problem to have. How many would like that problem? When we have a look at PFI to public wealth, if governments basically are sitting on particular tranches of land or railway or tube stations or whatever it happens to be, then we can convert the value of that land into what we call public wealth funds, And that can fund future infrastructure development without us having to actually go to the people and saying, I want to build a new train network and I'm going to tax you more for it. It also means that you don't have to go to the banks. Now, this is where we get weird. Okay? So this is Web 3. Web 3 is an early emerging trend. So I was having a chat with a chap basically who's just started a bus company. I don't know if he's in here. You in here? No, he's not in here. So Web 3, you can think of that as blockchain, crypto, and tokens. Now, when we talk about tokens, digital tokens signify ownership of something. So when you hand your coat into the cloakroom, they give you a token. That signals that you own the coat. When we talk about tokenization when it comes to Web 3, exactly the same concept, but I give you a digital token. Now, this means you can monetize everything. Because if you have an algorithm in your self-driving car, doesn't matter where it is, doesn't matter what it does, you can tokenize it. So you can almost like create shares in your algorithm. You can sell those tokens, those shares, to anybody, like crowdfunding. And then when you as a company or as an individual get a benefit from using that algorithm, maybe it saves money, maybe it makes money for people. Now what you have is I can own a share of your algorithm. It's called fractional ownership. It's a financial services trend that you wouldn't see in the mobility space traditionally. Every time your algorithm makes money or does whatever it does, I get a benefit. I get a dividend, whatever that is. Now, it's estimated that by 2030, the token economy will be worth $17 trillion. If you use Visa, if you have a Visa card in your pocket, Visa has now published more tokens, 4 billion tokens. It's published more tokens than it has physical cards. By 2040, it's estimated by companies like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and so on and so forth, that the token economy will be bigger than the entire global economy. This is a real wild card. If you don't understand Web 3 and how it relates to transportation as well as other things, just go and have a look. Now, when we look at business models, you have blank space as a service, right? Empty car as a service. Now, in Adidas's case, I was with them in Vienna and Linz about 2 months ago. We're talking about turning the empty spaces in vehicles into battle arenas. So when you're going to work, you can have a full virtual reality or augmented reality rig, you can be fighting people. And you can be fighting people either in your battle arena or anywhere on the planet. It's a whole conversation for another day. You can also turn them into mobile surgeries. So, for example, 143 million people die because they don't actually have access to surgeries. So what would happen if a surgery with a robot surgeon, with a robot, turned up out front? Using 5G, we can have a surgeon, I could be a surgeon, on stage. I could have a robot in a pod out the front. You could go in there and I could operate on you. We've done that in India. We've done it in China. So when you start thinking of these spaces as blank space as a service, you can fundamentally change how you deliver healthcare services, education services, doctor's services, all that sort of stuff, entertainment experiences. Now, for example, most cities have problems when it comes to office space and meeting rooms. If you go to London, there's a joke, you cannot get a meeting room. So I've already been talking to Hounslow, for example, in London and Westminster, and say, well, if you have cars that drive themselves, at what point does the local government say, we have a public transportation network, we are going to get into the business of providing mobile office and mobile meeting room as a service? Bearing in mind, when you have a look at public finances at the moment, they are really underwater. So, mobile offices. The other day, basically, I was talking to Disney basically about the future of theme parks and all that sort of stuff, and one of the problems they have is actually getting people into the theme parks fast enough. But these are also fully autonomous hotel rooms. So Disney, for example, could say, I tell you what, when you buy your Disney theme park ticket, if you live in Atlanta, we will have a fully autonomous hotel suite pick you up. We will bring it down to Disneyland in Orlando. But then these systems, I mean, you've got lots of other ones like these, but these systems then dock with the hotel. They become part of the hotel's infrastructure. So with the scaled up versions of these, you put all your stuff into literally your hotel room. And when you get to your hotel, these vehicles become part of the hotel infrastructure, and you walk out and then you go straight into a park. Fully autonomous shops. Nike are already 3D printing trainers. You could walk in here, scan your foot, and over here you could have a 3D printer that spits out a 3D printed Nike shoe. Adidas are doing that as well. And then these weird ones. So these are from sort of Citroen. But you get into kind of the strange things of what you can do with a blank space. This is a gym. How many of you got gyms at home? Yeah, you're lucky. You're living on campus. But seriously, what you could do is with Citroen, you can dial up yourself a gym. So when you're actually going to work or traveling to wherever you want, this one's got a rowing machine in it. But you kind of get the idea. When you have a blank space that moves around, you have lots of different options. When we have a look at infrastructure, you need strong 5G, 6G, mesh and space-based networks. When we look at quantum security, if you want to make sure your autonomous vehicles don't get hacked, you use what we call quantum public key, so quantum PKI and QKD technology. So quantum QKD technology is unhackable. That's how you secure an autonomous vehicle. Smart cities, adaptable and predictable, or predictive, but also invisible. If you have lots of vehicles that are essentially massive sensors on wheels moving around a city, you have this concept of spatial intelligence and the invisible city, because these vehicles are scanning your city and your populations in real time. They know exactly what's going on. And then you transfer this information into either a smart digital twin or a smart meta twin, which is kind of like a metaverse twin, and systems of systems. Infrastructure, when we talk about climate resilient. Now, on the one hand, if you forward project what will actually happen to, say, Slovakia, is your infrastructure climate resilient? Now, this is an interesting thing, because when we talk about, for example, Japan, we think about extreme weather. We've had a 6,000% increase in extreme weather events. But if you are planning for a climate resilient infrastructure in Japan, you'd be thinking, right, there are going to be more Category 4 and Category 5 typhoons. In Japan, and as well as in the US, they are already seeing the emergence of hurricanes that defy categorization. So in Japan and in the US, they're now calling for a Hurricane 6 scale. So when we talk about climate resilient, we're not talking about today's weather. We're talking about if you're building roads today that will last 100 years, what have those roads got to go through? Europe just went through the hottest summer ever. How many roads melted? You can reclaim car parks, but also we have self-healing infrastructure. So if you put magnetic particles into the roads, so into the tarmac, the roads heal themselves. You just literally pass a magnet over the roads and the potholes go away and the cracks go away. If you use a material called a biomineralization material, it's basically putting bacteria into concrete and into tarmac, then when concrete or tarmac gets cracks in it, those bacteria are exposed to air. Those bacteria then produce limestone and other sort of rocks. So we already have self-healing concrete. We also have self-healing roads. And then if some of your city is starting to flood, do you actually invest in roads, or do you just go straight to flying taxis? We're literally having these conversations in Louisiana and Florida, so sort of Miami. Because if Miami is increasingly underwater, do you spend $30 billion basically building better roads, or do you just go straight to flying cars? Or do you go underground? When we have a look at tunneling technology, we can make tunnels 10 times faster today for a whole variety of reasons. So tunneling technology is getting increasingly cheaper, which then means you can put your fully autonomous vehicles, or whatever they happen to be, on sleds, and then these vehicles are whisked underground at up to 200 miles per hour. In Sweden, they have just secured 4 billion euros worth of funding to build these kind of tunnel networks to move goods and services. So do you now reclaim the streets while also increasing infrastructure resilience? In Saudi Arabia, NEOM is a $500 billion smart city that they're building. All of the transportation infrastructure is underground. So making tunnels is getting a lot cheaper. Thanks to companies like The Boring Co., which is Elon Musk's outfit, but also Google, which is a fun conversation. And then finally, when we actually look at sort of what else is coming along the line, we've got things like hyperloops. So hyperloops are trains that travel in vacuum tunnels. Okay, now in Europe and in the US, these kinds of transportation systems, it's estimated they'll do Mach 1, so about 700 miles per hour. The prototypes at the moment are at about 350 miles per hour. Now compare that to a bullet train. The fastest bullet trains do about 620 miles per hour. But these are levitating on magnets. And again, that starburst I showed you, when you have a look at the future of magnets, we literally have magnets so powerful they will blow the doors off the labs. So when we actually have a look at the future of magnets, which actually has an impact on the future of hyperloops, there's a lot going on. And in China, they're now starting to build hyperloops that can travel at Mach 3. So that's about 2,500 miles an hour, which means that these things start impacting aviation networks and airplanes. But in addition to that, when you have a look at DP World is building hyperloop, or starting to build hyperloop networks in India. Why? Because when you look at container shipping, loads of containers come from Shanghai in China and then go to Rotterdam. So DP World know that if they have a network of these from Shanghai to Rotterdam via the Middle East, on the one hand, you can move containers at hypersonic speeds for the cost of trucking. Now, these are huge very heavy capital investment projects. You need a lot of money to even start doing these things, which is why it'll take decades before we see these things really starting to earn their money. But then when we have a look sort of at aviation, we have this. This is the X-36B from NASA. Now, when we have a look at Concorde and supersonic flight, the problem that Concorde had was when it went over land, it would have a supersonic boom. And regulators would say, you can't have a supersonic boom over land. It's a no-no, because we don't want everyone annoyed. Have a look at the nose on this. It was developed by NASA and Lockheed Martin. This is a perfectly quiet supersonic jet, and it's now going into production. When you have a look at this, this is called the Quarterhouse. Now, this has been, so Hermeus have now been signed up by the US Air Force because this particular plane is Mach 5. This is the future presidential jet for the United States president in about 7 to 10 years' time. However, there's a new version of the Quarterhouse that uses something called an oblique detonation engine. And what's special about an oblique detonation engine? Well, it uses ammonia, so it's carbon neutral. However, it does Mach 17. And then we have balloons in space coming out of Florida. So again, new materials let us do new things. These balloons are tied in with space planes from companies like Virgin Galactic and all that sort of stuff. But of course, if you've got space balloons and space planes, where are they going anyway? Well, thanks to Jeff Bezos and other philanthropic billionaires, Jeff Bezos has now got the green light from NASA to build the first private space business park, space hotel, space whatever he wants. So now we see 4 companies that in the next 5 years will start making space hotels. But when it comes to sort of more mundane things on the ground, so when I was here 3 years ago, and it's nice to be back, by the way, I showed the next little video, and I said that sort of by 2024, 2025, this would start becoming more reality. Now, in the past 3 years, the next thing that I'm going to show you, which is how I'd like to get around the world, has actually been flight tested over 70 times, but the FAA in the US has approved it to carry passengers, but also it's done its first intercontinental tests. So this is from SpaceX. So how would you like to live in Slovakia, but work at Bondi Beach, and then commute there and back every day? And this is carbon neutral, by the way, because we use solar fuels. Tests on that one went really well, by the way. That's it. So point-to-point rocket travel. And that's it from me. So as I say, I could have summarized this presentation, or I could have talked about the future of mobility in kind of 10 seconds at the start. Fully autonomous and alternative energy systems. However, as I hope you've managed to see now, there is a lot more to the future of mobility and transportation than just automation and new fuels. So thank you very much. I think we have some Q&A. But
Dámy a páni, Matthew Griffin, thank you. Your presentation was amazing. Do we have any questions from the public or from the audience? Yes, we have one. Pre tých, ktorí nás počúvajú vonku, prečo sa zameriavame na individuálnu dopravu? Nebolo by jednoduchšie riešenie zásadný rozvoj hromadnej verejnej dopravy? Why we are focused on individual transport? Isn't it easier to focus or to develop the public transport?
Yep. So when we have a look at public transportation, we've kind of got a fact that we have to wrestle with. If I say to you, what you can do is you can sit, I mean, how many of you sit in traffic jams going to work, or going to school or whatever it happens to be? Hands up. How many of you get stuck in traffic? Day in, day out and everything else. Why don't you take public transport? Okay? So while we should be focusing a lot more on public transportation because it is per person much more energy efficient and everything else, the fact of the matter is that when you're actually sitting on a bus, that's it, you aren't in your own private space. And that's today. When you're sitting in your car, you want to listen to your music. You want to chill out. You want the air conditioning at a particular temperature. You want to go point to point. You don't want to go point to a bus station and then have to walk 10 minutes in the rain. In summer it's quite nice, but, in winter it's different. So kind of on the one hand, basically, we like our convenience, but we like our comfort. So when we start having a look at, for example, even flying cars, there's a company in New York that is actually producing a flying bus that can take 40 people. That's it. But the fact of the matter is that when we have a look at the transportation types that we use, how many of you would rather actually sit in your own comfortable, fully autonomous car, basically with a massage chair, watching Netflix, or a public bus? Who would like to use the bus? There you go. So until you change culture, or unless the government incentivizes you to take the bus and says, because you took the bus today, you lowered our energy, you lowered our CO2 emissions by this amount, which therefore means we're going to give you a tax credit of $5 or something like that, or €5. Until you're able to change culture, public transport is generally going to stay 30% full and 70% empty, which is what companies in the UK actually see with the bus networks.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. There you go.
Takže Matthew Griffin s nami zostáva aj naďalej, ešte sa nelúči, pretože má ďalší program na vedľajšom stage 1, hneď teraz ako sa s ním rozlúčime. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Thank you,
day.
everybody.
On next
Take
stage.
care.